What happens when an elderly cleaner becomes the target of ridicule and contempt in an expensive hall? No one knew who he really was. What happened when the Marine left the entire hall speechless? The floor was clean. But his memory was not. He woke up as usual, not to an alarm clock, but to silence. A deafening silence that comes not from rest, but from the absence of sound. He dreamed of the day when he mixed up the directions on a foreign map and almost sent everyone into a trap. Waking up after something like that is no relief. It's a new shift. Harold got up, found his slippers, and poked his toe into the crack between the floorboards. The mouse had gnawed through the corner of the rug again. He sighed. He went to wash up. The water was rusty but warm. It was still dark outside. The neighborhood wasn't the safest. People didn't make noise here, they disappeared. In the kitchen was an old radio. It only worked on one frequency, with a constant hiss. Harold turned it on, not for the news, just so he wouldn't be alone. On the stove was a dirty pot from yesterday's soup. The soup was made of macaroni and frozen corn, all he had. He ate the leftovers straight from the pot, without reheating, sitting on a stool, staring out the window. Time didn't pass here. It lay there like a rag, twitching occasionally. He walked to work. The bus wasn't waiting, and he didn't want to waste money on it, better to save it for powder and soap. The building smelled familiar, damp linoleum, stale air freshener, burnt wiring. His replacement was young, thin, with an unshaven neck and a phone in his hand. He didn't say hello, just waved and walked past. Harold wasn't offended. Over the past 20 years, no one had said hello to him, and he didn't insist on it. He put on his uniform. It smelled of vinegar and something else, either old blood or dried glue. In the locker were rags, rubber gloves, and a bottle of something for disinfection. All his things. The first rooms were empty. Only the whistling of the ventilation and the stains on the floor, which he knew by heart. Over there was coffee spilled by a student who hadn't even apologized. Here were traces of dirty boots left behind after a corporate party. He didn't wash these stains. He knew it was useless. They would come back. But he washed them anyway. Because there was a logic to it. His own rhythm. Brush, bucket, rag, step. Brush, bucket, rag, step. Like a patrol, only without weapons or orders. There was a commotion in the lobby. Someone shouted, "They'll be here at 4, check hall 3 and the stage." He didn't listen. He just moved down the corridor, where the windows hadn't been washed since summer. He wiped the frames and the glass and noticed chewing gum on the windowsill. He scraped it off with a spoon he kept there for that purpose. Then he saw her. A stern woman of about 50, her hair in a bun, wearing a jacket with a thin stripe. The manager. Her voice was as cold as the bottom of a refrigerator. "You left marks on the carpet again. It's not just a carpet, it's rented. There are veterans here, you understand?" He nodded. Not because he agreed, but because he didn't want to talk. Because he knew that if he opened his mouth, everything would go to hell. He just wrung out the rag and started wiping, not even looking where. She left without even listening to him finish. And she left behind a trail of perfume and exhaustion. Harold was alone again, with a bucket, a rag, and an empty hall where even the clock ticked loudly, as if mocking him. He crouched down and bent over the floor again. He wasn't washing the tiles. He was washing himself. He knew this hall like the back of his hand. Every dent in the chairs. The hissing sound in the speaker by the left wall. He didn't just work here, he washed away other people's fatigue, the dust of their conversations, the smells of cheap wine and inappropriate flirting. The hall was being prepared for an official meeting today. A banquet. Marine veterans. The chandeliers were cleaned twice as long as usual, and expensive flowers were ordered. The tablecloths were new, not the ones stored in the damp warehouse. Harold heard the manager bragging about it to someone on the phone. They paid for everything in advance. Class. He remained silent. He always remained silent. He wasn't mute, he just hadn't found words that anyone wanted to hear in a long time. When no one was looking, he sat down on the steps by the back exit. His back ached. Not from work, from age. Silently, he took an old brass lighter out of his pocket. He hadn't smoked in 10 years. He just held it, clicking the lid. It was all scratched, blackened in places. A name was engraved on it, not his. He heard footsteps to his left. A young guy came out of the kitchen, balding, with a headset in his ear. He wasn't smiling out of kindness, just to show off. "Hey, old-timer," he said, "don't forget to wipe the floor with a rag at the entrance. Someone spit there. And anyway, the floor is slippery, someone else from the generals will fall and we'll all get fired." And he threw the napkin right at his feet. Harold looked at it. Then he looked up at the guy. He had already left without waiting for an answer. In this building, Harold's words had no value. Just like him. He didn't pick up the napkin right away. He just sat there. At that moment, he resembled a broken chair, still holding its shape, but with each passing day creaking more quietly so as not to disturb others. They hadn't broken him. They had simply stopped noticing him. Later, closer to lunchtime, he was called to the main hall to wipe down the handrails on the stairs. He took the bottle and rag and went. He climbed slowly, holding on to the railing. His knee ached, and his lower back shot with pain. He whispered to himself, "Just a little more, buddy, you can do it." "Not now, not here." He reached the top and stopped. Downstairs, at the entrance, stood a guy in his 20s in uniform. Camouflage. A military haircut. He was holding a bouquet and twirling it as if he didn't know why he had brought it. There was something strange about it. It reminded him of the airport in Kuwait. Morning. Dust. And the same look. Harold turned away. It was too early to remember. And too late to change anything. He went back to work. Brush. Rag. Solution. His hands moved mechanically. His brain shut down. Only smells and pain remained. He didn't know that this night would be a turning point. He was just washing the floor. Because no one else wanted to do it. The next morning began with the smell of a burnt toaster. Harold put the bread back in the toaster for 3 minutes, when it should have been 2, now the edges were blackened, like the days of his past life. He didn't eat, he just stood leaning against the sink while the toast slowly cooled on a saucer he had last washed last month. A faded newspaper lay on the table. 3 days ago, he had torn out the crossword puzzle, but hadn't finished it. Some of the words were too easy, others wouldn't fit. He didn't know which was more offensive, forgetting the obvious or not understanding other people's hints. He got to work a little later than usual. His replacement was smoking at the back door again and didn't say a word. He just handed him a bucket with a rag and someone's old hair tie floating in it. As a symbol of communication, wring it out yourself and don't complain. Inside, there was a buzz. Preparations for the event were in full swing. Plates clattered, waiters ran around like hunted dogs. Everyone was afraid of something. Not Harold. He had nothing left to lose. "Harold," a woman from accounting called out to him, "please wipe the handrails at the entrance. One veteran has a cane, and another has scars." "We need it to shine," he said nothing. He just nodded, as if he were not a person but a function. He had felt that way for a long time, a biological mechanism for removing other people's traces. At the entrance, he overheard a conversation. "Hey, who cleans up around here?" "Is it him?" a male voice asked mockingly. "Yeah, that old guy. He's been here a long time, I think," replied another. "Really? Why don't they replace him with someone normal? Look at him, he looks like he's about to fall apart. Come on, give it a rest. He doesn't say anything. That means he's easy to work with. Harold didn't turn around. He just kept polishing the railing. Gently, almost tenderly. Not for them, for himself. Because there was something in the clean details that he no longer had. After lunch, he went down to the storeroom. He had a mint candy in his pocket. He took them from the administrator, who secretly stole them from the reception desk and handed them out to his people. Harold wasn't one of his own, but he got the candy. Out of pity, maybe. He sat down on a box of rags, rested his head against the wall, and closed his eyes. He wanted to forget for just a minute. But he couldn't. Faces floated into his mind, one after another. Those he had led into battle. Those whose names he remembered better than his own. Sometimes he wondered, what if he hadn't agreed back then? What if he had stayed at home with his brother, his girlfriend, his father, who was still alive then? But no. He had made his choice. He had gone. And now he was sitting on a box, eating a popsicle and thinking about how to remove the gum he hadn't been able to scrape off the day before. That's how we live. By evening, the hall was sparkling. The chandeliers had been polished twice, and the carpet had been vacuumed, even under the chairs where no one sat. The tables were set with military precision, cutlery laid out neatly, glasses at an angle, candles unlit, waiting for the guests. Harold checked the hall one last time. Everything was in its place. Even the frames with the portraits at the entrance, with the inscriptions, Valor, Honor, and Service, hung perfectly straight. He had adjusted one of them himself when no one was looking. The corner was crooked. It was a small thing, but it caught his eye. He turned to leave and bumped into the same woman, the manager with eyes like needles. She looked him up and down, appraisingly, his uniform, his hands, his shoes. "The gentleman will be here in an hour," she said. "Harold, don't linger in the hall. We have important guests today. Everything must be perfect." No. Unnecessary background. Unnecessary background, he thought. That's what he had become. He nodded. He always nodded. But something inside him trembled. Not out of resentment, he had long since grown accustomed to that. But out of exhaustion from pretending. He no longer knew why he was doing it all. No one was threatening him. They were just slowly erasing him, like writing on a blackboard, and pretending that nothing had happened. In the back room, he leaned against the wall. Next to him was an old mirror. Cracked and cloudy. He looked at himself. Lint on his collar, deep wrinkles, skin like parchment. His gaze seemed to come from somewhere else, from the other side. He wasn't afraid of old age. He was afraid of disappearing, leaving nothing but footprints and fragments of memories with people who wouldn't remember his name anyway. At exactly 7 o'clock, he heard the front door slam shut. Guests began to arrive. The wail of a siren from a passing car ran across the glass. Someone from security was talking on a walkie-talkie. Waiters bustled about, arranging glasses with millimeter precision. It didn't feel like a party, but rather a miniature military operation. Only instead of weapons, there were glasses and name tags. He walked down the hallway toward the storeroom when he heard a familiar voice. "Did you not wipe under the stairs again?" It was the young chef, the one with the headset. Harold stopped. He slowly turned around. "I just slipped," the chef continued. "Is this your job or just a mud tour?" Harold did not answer. The guy took a napkin, wiped his shoe, and threw the dirty rag right into his bucket. "Come on, General Cleanliness, your front line is calling," he sneered and walked away. Harold stood there. For a long time. He just stared at the rag in the water. As if it wasn't trash, but something much heavier. As if someone had spat on an old metal and he could see it sinking. He pulled out the rag. Wrung it out. Went back to wiping the stairs. And then, Through the glass door, he saw the first guest. A man in camouflage, standing straight. He entered slowly. Looked around. And froze for a moment. Right in front of him. He didn't immediately realize that someone was looking at him. His eyes were different than before. And not because of his vision, it was just that over the years he had learned not to meet people's gaze. Not because he was afraid, because he understood too much. But this gaze pierced through the glass, through the walls, through the indifference. There stood a guy. Tall. In camouflage. Real, not stylized. No showing off. He had a posture that would make many people's backs crack. And he was looking straight at Harold. The waitress walked by, the door creaked. The Marine took a step forward. Harold lowered his eyes and began to wipe the railing. Slowly. As if that could cancel the meeting. "Sir," the voice said. Not, "man," not, "excuse me," not, "do you work here?" Just, "Sir." Harold froze. The rag was still in his hand. He didn't look up right away. He couldn't believe it was meant for him. The guy came closer. His boots clinked on the tiles like footsteps in a parade. He stopped half a meter away. "Excuse me, sir. I'm sorry if I'm mistaken. Were you in Sanjan? In that unit? In 2003? Harold's fingers tightened. So tightly that the rag squeaked. He slowly raised his eyes. His lips were pressed into a thin line. He wanted to lie. To say no. To say he didn't know what he was talking about. But he exhaled, yes. The Marine stood at attention. "Damn," someone whispered behind him. "It's him," said someone else. "It's Captain Burns." Harold didn't flinch. He just stood there. Silent. And he felt the air grow heavier. A silence hung in the room, as if someone had turned off the sound. 2 more men approached him. Older men. They were wearing jackets and medals. One of them immediately took off his cap. "My God, Harold," he said quietly. "We thought you were dead." "I almost was," Harold replied without irony. "Just as it was." The female manager froze. Her mouth was slightly open. Her eyes were wide. The chef, the same one who had thrown the napkin yesterday, peeked out of the kitchen and froze as if the power had been cut off. One of the Marines approached and said aloud, "We are standing here only because this man brought us out of hell. He was the last to leave. He never abandoned his men. Never." A deathly silence hung in the room. Even the waiters stopped. Someone dropped a fork. Someone bowed their head. And Harold stood there. Just stood there. With a rag in his hand and pain in his chest. As if he had come home. But he was a different man now. He didn't ask to be recognized. He didn't want applause. All he wanted in his last years was for no one to ask questions. He didn't want to be reminded of where he had been, who he had dragged through the wet mud, whose voices he still heard at night. But there they stood. Those who had survived. Those who remembered. One of them came closer. His fingers were shaking, but he still tried to straighten his shoulders. He had the same eyes as Harold, eyes that had seen things better left unsaid. "I remember how you pulled me out when I was unconscious. You didn't sleep for 3 days after that. You even wiped my blood off your hands so the command wouldn't see." Harold didn't answer. He just stared. Something clicked in his chest. It wasn't pain or pride. It was something else. Something unfamiliar. Abandoned. At that moment, the impossible happened. The young chef, the one with the headset, came closer. Slowly. Without a word. There was no smirk or arrogance in his eyes. Only something heavy. Shame, probably. Or something close to it. He stopped and took off his gloves. "I'm sorry," he said. Harold said nothing. He just nodded. Not like a commander. Like a man who had been silent for too long. And tired of explaining. The female manager was the last to approach. There was something in her eyes that you rarely see in people in this profession: fear. Not for herself. For who she had become in this situation. "I didn't know," she said. "My God, Harold. Why didn't you tell us?" He exhaled. "Why should I have?" She didn't know what to say. Half an hour later, everything looked different. Harold sat at a separate table, not his desk, but next to the veterans. He wasn't wearing a suit. He hadn't taken off his work uniform. And that was right. Because he only had one uniform. The one he never took off, the one inside. He didn't laugh louder than everyone else. He didn't make toasts. But everyone hung on his every word. And each of his phrases was met not with applause, but with silence. Respectful, deep, mature. He didn't want to be a hero. But he couldn't be a piece of furniture anymore. The next morning began with an unusual silence. More precisely, with a different kind of silence. Before, it had been heavy, like a wet rag. Now it was tense, alert. It was as if the air in the building had become denser. Harold arrived early, as always. But now he was not greeted as if he were invisible. The security guard looked him in the eye. He even nodded. And he seemed to say quietly, "Good morning, sir." The word "sir" stuck like a stain on his sleeve. Unfamiliar. Alien. But impossible to wash off. He went up to the locker room. His locker was open. And on top of it was a box. Not new. But neat. Inside were gloves. New ones. Work gloves, sturdy. And a small note, for the captain. "So your hands don't get cold." No signature. And that made it even more meaningful. He didn't ask who it was from. It wasn't who that mattered, but why. The hall was quiet. It was as if the air itself understood that it had to whisper. The waiters moved more quietly than usual. No one gave orders. No one threw napkins around. Everyone knew that the man they had been talking about yesterday was working here. But Harold didn't sit down at the table, didn't change his clothes. He took a bucket and a rag and went to wipe the windowsills. Because if he didn't wipe them in time, the dust would remain. And the dust would turn back into dirt. And he still knew how to fight it. A couple of hours later, a new manager approached him. He was young, with slick back hair and rehearsed politeness. "Mr. Burns," he began with a forced smile, "management has decided, we want to transfer you to the office. To the position of senior coordinator. The salary is higher. There are fewer responsibilities." Harold straightened up. He looked at him straight, without a smile. "I'm not a coordinator. I'm just a man who knows where your pipe is leaking behind the stage. And who will put gum under the chair at the second exit today." The guy froze. "But, you could, not work with a rag." "I've been with it a long time," said Harold. "It's the only thing that hasn't betrayed me." The administrator nodded. Quickly. Embarrassed. And left, as if he had stepped on a landmine. Harold remained. Alone. With a rag and a bucket. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't ashamed to be there. In the evening, after his shift, he went to the back exit. There was an old bench there, unpainted and crumbling in places. He used to sit there when he didn't have the strength to go straight home. He just sat there, listening to the pipes humming in the walls, waiting for the pain in his chest to subside. But today someone was already sitting on the bench. It was the guy from yesterday, the Marine. With the same straight shoulders and tired face. On his knees was a container with something homemade. He looked up, as if waiting. "I thought, maybe you hadn't eaten," he said. Harold sat down next to him. Slowly. He sighed. "I didn't think anyone else remembered what a normal dinner looked like." The guy smiled. "My mom insisted. She said if I didn't bring you food, she wouldn't let me in the house." He opened the lid. Inside was stewed chicken and mashed potatoes. It smelled like home. Like mornings before everything went wrong. They ate in silence. Just the two of them. Without words. Because there was no longer a void between them. There was earth. Dirt. Sand. And people who were no longer there. After the third spoonful, Harold said, "I pulled 5 people out back then. One didn't make it." The guy nodded. "I was told." "Was he your brother?" Harold froze. He didn't answer for a long time. "Almost. We weren't related. But, he knew when I was lying. And he always stood by me. He was the best of us. And I came back." A sigh. Deep. Stuck somewhere between his stomach and his throat. "And since then, I've been washing. Not the floor. Myself. Over and over again." The Marine said nothing. He just put his hand on his shoulder. No words. No favors. Just human. When Harold went home, he didn't take the container. He left it there. As a reminder, someone was still there. At least a little. In the elevator, he looked at his reflection. Not in the mirror, at himself. And for the first time in many years, he didn't look away. In the morning, there was toast again. It was a little burnt, as always. But Harold ate it slowly, savoring it as if it were his first time. Something that looked like oatmeal was bubbling on the stove. The smell was simple, homey, like a Sunday morning 40 years ago. He put on his uniform. The same one. He didn't bother washing off yesterday's dust, it didn't bother him anymore. It was now part of his journey. When he entered the building, the lobby was crowded. Not noisy, but crowded. Waiters were setting up coffee stations, a technician was fiddling with the speakers. And on the big screen hung a photo. Not a new one. Old. Black and white. It was him. Young. In uniform. Not smiling, but determined. The caption read, "Those who survive don't always shout about themselves. Some just keep serving." He stopped. He stared. Everything inside him tightened. He didn't know who had done this. Who put up the photo? Who dug up the archives? Who realized that this silence was not a sign of weakness, but of strength? "Mr. Burns?" A woman with a badge approached him. "Management asked you not to work today. Just be here." "I've been just being my whole life," he replied. "I need a rag and a bucket. There's a slippery step in the hall, near the stage." She didn't know what to say. Harold went into the hall. Alone. Without orders, without a schedule. And there they were again, the same people. Marines. Old, like him. Younger. New ones. In camouflage and without. But now they all had the same look in their eyes. Understanding. He sat down in a corner. Not on the stage. Not in the center. Just where he could see everyone. The cook, the same one, came over and set a cup of coffee in front of him. Hot. In a ceramic mug, not a disposable cup. "No words," he said. "Just thank you." Harold nodded. There was no honor in that coffee. No flattery. But there was a taste of respect. Which he didn't ask for. But damn it, he deserved it. When the hall emptied, he didn't rush to leave. He stayed, as always. To clean up after others. He moved a chair and picked up a fallen handkerchief. On the chair lay one of the guests' badges, with a gold logo and engraving. He carefully placed it on the edge of the stage so it wouldn't get lost. He didn't feel like a hero. Nor did he want to. The scene where he was thanked was already behind him. The applause died down. And that was right. Because the real meaning is not in the ovation, but in what you do when no one is watching. One of the young employees approached and asked if he could give him a ride home. He refused. "I'll walk. I need to clear my head." Clear my head. He left the building. He walked slowly. On the wet asphalt. The wind was cool, like the palm of his mother's hand, which he hadn't held in a long time. He had that same lollipop in his pocket. He opened it, put it in his mouth, and tasted childhood. Not because it was sweet. It was because it wasn't bitter. Passing by a bus stop, he saw some teenagers. They were pushing and shoving, laughing and swearing. One of them threw a bottle into a trash can and missed. Harold walked over, picked it up, and threw it in properly. The boy wanted to say something, but froze. Harold just looked at him. With a tired but honest look. "Thanks, Grandpa," the boy muttered. Not cheekily. But with a hint of something real. Harold nodded and walked on. When he got home, the first thing he did was take off his shoes. Slowly. As if lifting a weight off his shoulders. He went into the kitchen, turned on the radio, it hissed again. He didn't bother to change the station. Let it hiss. There was life in that cacophony too. He sat down. Not to eat. Not to work. Just because. And he realized, he hadn't lost himself. He had just been walking in silence for a long time. Let no one know how many times he saved others. Let no one see how he held on when he was breaking inside. But one person knew. He said it out loud. "I'm sorry, sir." Sometimes that's enough. When a person is silent, it doesn't mean they don't have a story. Write the word respect in the comments if you believe that the past should not be erased just because it doesn't shout about itself. And if you've had someone like that in your life, tell us who they were. We read every story.